in Jerusalem, as it happened, and spoke to her that evening, and I had not known of this matter. I said, of course I would come. And in the days since, thinking of the event and thinking what to say to you, and counseling with my friends and colleagues in the Congress, Chairman Solars, and my dear friend Representative Schumer, it has seemed to me that there were three things to be said to the world and to ourselves. The first is this: that in the face of such great sorrow of death, there is yet the affirmation of life. Here we are, the other side of the world from the place where a loving mother and her child were murdered. And we are gathered in sorrow and protest and affirmation. She and her husband and her child and her unborn child are not alone in the world. People are not forgotten. They are remembered. The hostages of Syria, if I remember your correct pronunciation correctly, are part of us. They are not disconnected. We are one human life on earth, and while any of us is hostage, all of us is concerned, and we bear witness to that here tonight. That is a great and an affirming thing. The second thought I would have for you is that we are not here to threaten anyone else. We are here to affirm life and to ask justice. We speak not from the power of our nation, but from the truth of our convictions. What happened in Aleppo is sacrilege, is unacceptable by the standards of the world, by our standards, and those involved must know it. We ask that the Jewish people of Syria be free. We ask that they be free as we are, as we would hope all the world would be. We ask it out of the sense of the truth of that affirmation that God has given freedom to his children and expects of nations that they will allow it, that they will permit it, that they will, if they are wise, celebrate it. We are not here to threaten, but neither are we here to plead. The government of Syria must know that it has a offended the standards of nations and the rights of peoples everywhere. And that there can be consequences to this too. I have just come from the Middle East. I have been aboard our ships of war there. The carrier Independence, the carrier Guam, the battleship New Jersey. I have been ashore with our forces there. The Marine Battalion landing team. I've seen the French and the Italians, the British there too. The world is saying something about that part of the world. And we would wish to be modulated, but we would wish to be understood. This is not the first time our nation has been called upon and has felt itself called upon to speak to these matters. It is not the first time that the Jews of Syria have found themselves the subject of outrage and the object of concern. In 1840, in Damascus, there was a massacre occurred. Martin Van Buren of New York, then President of the United States, instructed our ambassador then in Istanbul to raise the issue with the government there. And the British sent a warship to the area. In 1903, in Kishinev, Jews were slaughtered. And Theodore Roosevelt, President of the United States and a New Yorker, took the most severe action. He recalled the American ambassador from the Sublime Porte, as it was then called. And again, the world responded. In some sense, small events of the 19th and early 20th centuries, we had not hardened ourselves to the horror of this age. And yet the people involved should know that we have not forgotten that capacity for concern. We do not threaten, but we do state that if it should come to a test of will and resources, surely the powers in Damascus must know how overwhelmingly they are overbalanced. And that when a United States senator and 2 United States congressmen come to a congregation to speak to such matters, we do not do in the spirit of threat or violence, but we do it with resoluteness even so. Chairman Solars introduced and passed in the United States Congress a resolution asking the United States to concern itself with the ability of the Jewish citizenry of Syria to emigrate, and it was unanimously adopted. Charles Schumer has introduced such a resolution in the House this year. I shall introduce it in the Senate tomorrow. It will be adopted. we, we want everyone to know of our goodwill, but we do not wish anyone to doubt our determination. We will see this issue out. These people will not be forgotten. They will not be forsaken. We stand with them here in New York. We stand with them around the world. We will stand with them until they are free. You are good. God bless you.
Thank you so very much, our beloved Senator. Just a few days ago, one of the most important citizens of Brooklyn, New York, perhaps the #1 citizen, won a smashing political victory which was applauded by everybody who knows him. We all love him. We all respect him. We all admire him. He is a true friend of all the Jewish people. He's a true friend of the borough of Brooklyn, all the citizens. But he has a very warm spot for our community. He's been here several times. He has spoken to us. We visit with him very often. He is most cooperative. He's one of the sweetest people I have ever met. I want to give you the #1 citizen of Brooklyn, New York, our borough president, Howard Golden.
Chief Rabbi Kassin, Rabbi Hecht, worthy rabbis, my colleagues in government on the dais and in the audience, distinguished guests and friends. I am here as an outraged government official. I am here as an outraged Jew. I am here as just a person who was outraged. And I'm here today to join with my brothers and sisters who feel the tragedy which befell these families in Syria. For once again, the theme of this evening, You Are Next, applies not only to the people of Syria, singled out for tragedy, not just to the Jewish community in Syria, but it applies to each and every Jew the world over. It is for this reason that I am pleased to deliver this proclamation in the name of the Governor of the State of New York. State of New York Executive Chamber. The Jews in Syria, numbering some 4,000 souls, have been living in constant fear, experiencing discrimination, and deprived of their basic and elemental rights as citizens of their country, have been subjected to acts of violence and terrorism, and denied the universally recognized right to emigrate. A community-wide rally is being organized in support of their human rights on Tuesday, January 31st, 1984. Now, therefore, I, Mario M. Cuomo, Governor of the State of New York, do hereby proclaim January 31, 1984 as Save Syrian Jewry Day in New York State, and I join with the Syrian Jewish community of New York and with all citizens of the State of New York in requesting unrestricted emigration of Syrian Jews to countries of their choice and the protection of the security, safety, and human rights of those Jews who choose to remain in Syria. I appeal to President Hafez Assad of Syria to meet these humanitarian requests on behalf of Syrian Jews. Given under my hand and the Privy Seal of the State of the Capitol in the city of Albany this 26th day of January in the year 1984, and it's signed Mario M. Cuomo, Governor.
The borough president had another engagement, and he has to leave right now. We thank him very, very much. Give him a big hand.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that this was a real sacrifice for him. He had a speaking engagement. I don't know what the other people are going to do when he comes in 2 hours late. But he is a lovely, wonderful, good friend, and he stayed, and we really appreciate it. Let's give him another hand so he'll remember it. My dear friends, I want you to know that our most distinguished and beloved senator couldn't just leave Washington and come here. In fact, we chartered a plane and brought him and two most distinguished congressmen. And they'll have to be leaving right away because the plane is waiting, and I'm sure I apologize on their behalf. It wasn't their fault. National Airport kept them sitting there for an extra hour. Otherwise, they would have been on time. I thank you for your indulgence and understanding. When I first heard this terrible tragedy, the very first person I turned to was our congressman. He wasn't in the States. He was away on one of his fact-finding trips where he accumulates much data, which he then uses in his very important Foreign Relations Committee, of which he is a ranking member. But we lost no time, and within 12 hours, he called me from Brasilia, and we had a long discussion. What can and should be done? He immediately dispatched a letter to the president, after which he sent out feelers and got in touch with our State Department, and he registered our outrage at what has happened. And ever since that time, he's been traveling, but he's been in constant contact with our community, doing a beautiful job. I know that many of us here have had occasion to use his good offices. Many people who have come from overseas have been helped to be able to remain in these states because of his intervention. He represents our community with great pride, and we are very proud of him. It is now my pleasure to present to you our beloved Congressman, Stephen Solars.
Chief Rabbi of Jerusalem, Chief Rabbi Kassin of our own community, Rabbi Hecht, Abe Dweck, who in his capacity as chairman of the Committee to Save Soviet Jewry, was the very first person to bring the plight of the Jewish community in Syria to my personal attention just after I was elected to the Congress of the United States 10 years ago. My dear, dear friend, Steve Shalom, who perhaps more so than any other person has been in the forefront of the fight to help this beleaguered community, and with whom I traveled to Syria on a mission of mercy on behalf of the Jewish community in that country several years ago. And of course, so many of my other good friends from the community who have worked closely with me over the course of the last decade in the effort to help the beleaguered Jewish community in Syria. In the face of this terrible tragedy, in the face of this dastardly deed, one hardly knows what to say. When I first learned what had happened, as Rabbi Hecht indicated, I called both him and Steve Shalom from Brazil, where I was then on a fact-finding mission for the Foreign Affairs Committee, in order to get the benefit of their advice about what I might do to be helpful under the circumstances that existed at the time. As Rabbi Hecht indicated, I immediately sent a letter to President Reagan, calling upon him to make it clear to the government of Syria that we would take into account how they treated the Jewish community in their country as we determined how best to deal with them in the days ahead. And because they both felt that it would be reassuring to the Jewish community in Syria if there could be some public expression of concern on the part of our own administration, I also called the Assistant Secretary of State for the Near East, Mr. Richard Murphy, who some of you may know was our ambassador to Syria and who worked very closely with us over the course of the last several years in our efforts on behalf of the community in that country. And I asked Secretary Murphy if there was some way in which we could put on the public record, if only as a way of letting the 4,000 Jews who remain in Syria know that the United States government was concerned about their fate, some record of our concern in this regard. I received just the other day the following letter from him. Dear Congressman Solars, I refer to our telephone conversation on the question of the tragic murder of the wife and children of Mr. Victor Abadi in Aleppo, Syria. I want to assure you that the United States government has been concerned about this tragedy since the news first reached Washington in late December. We have conveyed our concern to the authorities of the Syrian government. We understand that Syrian authorities have provided police protection to 2 families in the Aleppo Jewish community who have received threatening phone calls since the murders.